Content Podcast, episode 196. Writer and environmental communicator Irene Whittaker. Part 2. A review of homing. A quest to care for myself and the earth.
I think a lot of people right now are feeling terror or feeling deep grief, worry about climate, and might mention it in a joking way over dinner, like, oh, well, we'll see if we're all around in 20 years. And there's so much truth to that, to the pain people are feeling and the worry. And so in the end, I hope that it's helpful to share my personal emotional experience of this, even though it's very vulnerable to do so.
Welcome back, Irene.
Thank you. So nice to talk with you again.
So as I promised during our first conversation on June 10th, that was a couple of months ago, that's episode 187 for people who want to listen to the first one first before you listen to this one. It was called Caring for the Planet I Love, and that was really nice to get to know you through that conversation. And I mentioned that I would be doing a second conversation with you about your book, Homing, A Quest to Care for Myself and the Earth. And I'm going to publish this the day of the launch on September 3rd. So I know that after that, there's a series of events in Ottawa and maybe elsewhere, and I'll put those in the episode notes so that people can not only get the book, but attend events where you're speaking and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
And so I've written a review of the book, which I don't think I've ever written a review of a book before formally, so it's like a little, but it, so I'm pretending to be a literary critic. But in this context, it's pretty easy because I like the book. In fact, I love the book. I have some comments on it, of course. And I recommend it. I just finished it today, literally, and it's so beautiful to read and to go on the journey with you. So we'll talk all about that. But first, I want you to just sit quietly and listen to the review. And you can take notes there if you want, if there are things that come up. And then we'll talk about it, But my review, I think, is a way for me to tell you what my experience was in reading the book, and for listeners as well. Here we go. I love the flow of the book, like gently canoeing down a river with occasional sudden rapids and some portaging. And I noticed that you often refer to rivers in the book, so there's a river theme, and we'll get back to that. At times, the mix of practical and poetic did not work for me. But then, I'm not your average reader either, because my life story is actually a little bit like yours, except that I was a perfectionist and overachieving musician instead of a dancer, and I didn't break my arm. Not yet, anyway. But I think we were both brought up in a way where we were enamored with nature as children, and worried sick about the implications of modernity and our complicity in it. At the time, we wouldn't have used those terms, but I certainly felt that, and I think you did as well. So on the practical side of the book, I enjoyed learning more about eco-responsible local living, which is not a new thing to me. The buy nothing movement you talked about, the unbuilding movement, it was new to me, the way that you take apart a building and then you reuse the pieces. Permaculture I knew about, and I love the way you talked about the 37th degree isotherm in relation to butterfly life. So I want to come back to that. But these are some of the new things that I discovered, because it's a mix of science and poetry. And so you learned a lot of things, and there's some really great stories in the book. So I'll give you a couple of quotes of things that I really liked. You talk about fashion as an ecosystem of justice, climate, soil, labor, gender, creativity, expression, and culture, made up of people each with their own offerings and niche, intricate and in its diversity and interconnections. And that's a whole section about sustainable fashion, which I don't know that much about, so I appreciated that. And at one point you talked about it's time for a whole of self-transformation, one that is messy and imperfect and wholehearted, which must not be easy for a perfectionist to do, to embrace. We'll get to that. And I love your thinking around economic issues. You wrote that for the circular economy or any alternative model to be meaningful, it has to recognize indigenous worldviews and pay reparations to the people who have been exploited, traumatized, and marginalized in the centuries-long project of the linear patriarchal colonial and capitalist economy. And that kind of language resonates with me. I think that's right on. And there's one on the more poetic side that I really enjoyed. In fact, I listened to it, I read it a few times, and each time I had sort of an image in my mind. Snow is water holding its breath, a calm pause after a deep inhale, waiting for that great exhale of spring when, instead of air, water rushes forth with relief. So that's a beautiful transition between winter and spring, and I thought the language was really wonderful. Of course, the book Homing made me think about my own home. We're sitting in our home, my home here in Ottawa, and what is my own idea of a home, and I haven't settled on it yet, but I hadn't thought of it the way you have. But I did talk to an artist, an Indigenous artist, Sandra Laronde, who interestingly mentions home, and I'll read you what she said. I really believe that we carry the spirit of the land wherever we go. In the Western canon, they say that once you leave home, you can never return, but in the Indigenous canon, home never leaves you. So I see affinities between Sandra's statement about home never leaves you and the purpose of your book that's in the book cover, about care, motherhood, healing, faltering, and searching for ways to live during breakdown, and about finding home when our planetary home is eroding and questioning how and whether to have hope. Which, of course, made me start thinking about what is hope, and what is home, and what is life, and what is love. So all these questions were raised. So I think that'll happen to those who read the book as well. Almost done. One of the things that caught my attention in your book is the idea of breakdown. And some might call it ecological or societal collapse, but different types of breakdown, which is a necessary step in nature's regeneration process, but is also necessary for us to live through as we exit this problematic modern world. And listeners will see here, or they'll read the word through, and we can go back to that when we talk, because the through word comes through a lot in the book and is, I think, really important to your thesis. So, to summarize, I would say that homing is a hoot. There are funny moments, it's quite moving, but it's also very sobering, and I am happy that it's connected to the realities as I see them, and I think you have made a point of expressing what is really going on and what we can do about it. And what I think you're doing is you're helping us to batten down the hatches and get ready for storms that are already here. And I know you've experienced it this week with floodings in your property in Chelsea, Quebec, and the disappearance of some land. And so that is very visceral, I'm sure, for you to have written a book about these things and then to have experienced it.
Yes.
And so that's something that we can talk about. I'm almost done. There was something on page 171 that I really liked. Believing in myself as beneficial rather than harmful provided a deep and unfamiliar freedom. I really like that. Believing in myself as beneficial rather than harmful. And I think you're talking about your humanity there. So, in the good literary critic language, this book is a valuable addition to ecological and climate crisis literature. And I do think it is. I've read a lot of books. It's so deeply personal that we can literally feel your pains and joys and those of your families. And that's a nice experience for us as readers. But it's also a universal story that it can appeal to anyone, anywhere, I think. And I think it's a literary tour de force, and in the sense that you've been able to combine the explicative with the poetic in ways that are very compelling. And it's not really about you, even though it's your story. It's about life. So I want to thank you and your family, because I know they're exposed in this. And I hope you'll write a sequel, when you're ready. Like, what's next? Where does this go? Because it's like the beginning of your story. So, from my home here on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe lands, also known as Ottawa, what do you think?
Wow, what a thoughtful review. And you said it was your first book review. It's my first book review I've ever received, which is very special. And thanks for putting so much thought into that and insight. And I think it really is the first time I've heard someone else's experience of it. And it's my first book, my debut book. And there's something so beautiful and also strange about this thing that's been so personal and so intimate almost and deeply tied to myself that now it doesn't belong to me anymore. And hearing other people's impressions is so interesting. And I made a lot of notes there with many things that struck me. And I feel like that when you mentioned the poetic and the practical, and that was something I wrestled a lot with. And I think I as a person, have both of those sides of me. And creating this book really started in the practical. Like, I wanted to create a big idea book that had all of these practical ways of, okay, how do you build a home in a way that is in right relationship with the earth, and from the clothes you wear to the food you eat, everything that you're doing as a person, how do you do so in a way that's in rhythm with nature's cycles? And I put maybe 2% in there that was personal, just enough to, who is this person writing this book? And then over many years working on it, and through feedback I got from different, literary people, or, all the steps of the process of getting a book made, it was like, this is actually a really different book than I didn't set out to write a memoir. I set out to write an idea book. But though I learned a lot about who I am and how the personal experience of this is shaping all of those practical aspects. And so it really did become more poetic and more personal through writing it. And I think that's the book it was always meant to be. And I feel like it's easy, I'm a communicator often, but it's easy to not hide, but it's easy to, put up all of these things around policy and statistics and actions, but it's not actually spoken about that much, the real human experience of this. I think a lot of people right now are feeling terror or feeling deep grief, worry about climate, and might mention it in a joking way over dinner, like, oh, well, we'll see if we're all around in 20 years. And there's so much truth to that, to the pain people are feeling and the worry. And so in the end, I hope that it's helpful to share my personal emotional experience of this, even though it's very vulnerable to do so.
Well, I invite you to comment on other things I said, but I think it's very personal, because there's birthing stories, and there are things that are very intimate, that we don't share, including vulnerabilities as a young person, the mistakes we made and the obsessions, and just putting it all out there. And I think it's healing to admit the things that we are, perfectionism is both a good and a bad thing. It's not necessarily a judgment, but it can get in the way of getting things done.
Yes, and in the way of, humanity and a life well lived, I think. Maybe that's where, write what you know. I know perfectionism, so I think that comes out a lot. That's something I think too, that people are, there's a lot of environmental information out there, but people feel ashamed that they're not doing it right, or I'm not actually an environmentalist because I drive this car, or I eat meat, or I do this, or I do that, and I've tried to be candid in there that sometimes I've had times when I'm a vegetarian and I'm going to zero waste grocery stores, and other times we're driving in our minivan to Costco to get food, and it comes in plastic packaging, and that's part of being a human. I mean, you can do things to an extent, but that's part of being a human in the systems that we have. And so I've tried to be open about all of those realities as well.
Well, maybe we'll go through your list of comments, and I have a few more questions after that.
Well, I liked how you mentioned, there are a couple of, things that you knew and things that you didn't know in terms of practices. And I think that's something that people will learn something new about an environmentally friendly practice. And it's not it's not like a really deep dive into renewable energy or anything like that. It's more a web of all of these different things that people are doing. And so on my quest to learn more about, okay, how should I be a human being right now in a way that feels like I am beneficial and I am good? And I spoke to dozens of people, as you know, from reading it, that shared with me what they're doing. And so I learned a lot along the way about, oh, wow, this is, for one person, it looks like the way they're farming and growing food. And for another person, it's the art they're making. And we all have these different offerings right now at this time. And so I'm hopeful that people will learn, like, oh, I already, I knew about Buy Nothing groups. I didn't know about sustainable fashion in this depth. And so that's my journey too. I learned a lot along the way. And like you said, the word faltering, I like that.
Well, in the examples you talk about trips you've done and conferences, and we all do that. We go to events that we're interested in, and I think that kind of learning through being present in conversations and feeling the energy also of people who are committed to, say, sustainable fashion and the dilemmas that they face, of trying to make a living while doing the right thing. We think and you talked about your economic woes over the years, and how are we going to afford this house, and where are we going to live, and what are we going to eat tomorrow?
Right.
Which a lot of artists deal with, right?
Yes.
So I appreciate that approach, as opposed to just sort of dry theoretical or to-do book where you say, well, these are the things that you can do, which are valuable, but you kind of weaved in le vécu, your experience as a person and as a family, to make these things more real, because you did it, like you faltered and you floundered and you excelled in housing and education, and like all of us, you struggled with COVID, and what did you do? So I find that interesting to have as an example of the kind of openness we can have with each other. This is where I'm at. Like we're planning to fly, to India next year, and I'm struggling with the carbon footprint, and I've probably done more than my share in terms of compensating for, but does that get me off the hook? I don't think so.
Right.
So, you just have to have that awareness, be a positive force. How does it help you make decisions? And then reading your book helped me understand how the decisions you made and why, and the pleasure you get from recycling and the social connections with people in your community around sharing, the tool sharing story. All those kinds of things are, they're kind of inspiring to how we can live well, even better with less.
Well, and when you mention, are you on the hook? It's like I spend a lot of time figuring out, like, is there a hook? Like, should we be feeling terribly and punishing ourselves? And that's not to say that we can't be accountable or that we can't do our best, because I firmly believe we need to do everything we can. But just that feeling, like the guilt and the shame and, oh, I did this. Like I let go of that a lot. I used to feel that a lot, and I don't anymore in the same way. And I see myself more as a human who's experiencing this and part of it, and searching, and less of a culprit, I suppose. Yeah.
And then there's the Naomi Klein quote, which is wonderful, because she reminds us that we're caught in a system that is destructive, and that we are, as humans, are not naturally destructive. We're actually naturally cooperative, and usually work within boundaries, or we have in the past, until we got into this mad system of capitalism and growth, endless growth, and the things that we are struggling to get out of, but we will get out of, because or else we will all disappear.
Right. Right. Yes, that's exactly it. And what will our movement look like? And I don't mean just the narrow environmental movement, but the whole human movement during climate change and the breakdown of nature. How does it serve us if the bulk of people who are not making these huge, terrible decisions that the most powerful are making, if we all feel badly and are either feeling righteous or feeling embarrassed or guilty, or I shouldn't try anyways because I like meat and I'm not going to give it up. And so I'm already doing badly. I don't think it serves the ultimate project of environmental stewardship if most people are feeling badly, and if the people who care the most are feeling badly too and getting more and more demoralized. So I've let go of a lot of the guilt while still trying to do what I can, but I feel less like it's my fault now.
Well, good for you, because it isn't your fault, and you've done more than your share. But when you write a book, you kind of put yourself out there, and there will be critiques of, whatever the people don't like. But I've found it to be as artistic as it is activist, which is a space I like, because I like both of those things. I think action is important, and I think reflection and poetry and aesthetics, the beauty, the way you describe nature is just so wonderful.
Thank you.
It's just, you want to be
a lot.
You want to be there,
Yeah.
So what else you got on your list there?
Also on my list. Well, and I know so I have 3 more things. One was, you mentioned through coming up a lot, and motherhood is in there a lot. And that was one of the big learnings from childbirth that continually comes up for me, which is like the only way is through. Like there's no sidestepping it. There comes a point, and you think about it for a long time. When will it be? How will it be? And you don't know any of that, but you do know you will need to go through it. And childbirth taught me that a lot. And so maybe that's why that comes up so much, is because the years covered in the book are years in which I was having babies and raising babies, young children, and through is very much a part of that. And I think I'm proud of that childbirth wisdom that came through that, and that I haven't read a lot of books by young mothers. Not that I'm that young necessarily, but mothers of young children. I think it's a time when you're so needed and so occupied by raising children that there aren't tons of books of that time or of that experience. And so that was something that I originally didn't set out to write, but needed to come out in the story. So I think that's what the through is all about. And the other piece was around, I know we'll get to this, but home when home is eroding. And I've written that many times in, like, if I'm writing something for social media or contributing to the copy on the book and that kind of thing, is I've said that, like, how do you, and which is one of the central questions of the book, is how do you create home, cultivate home when home is eroding? Home being our larger planetary home. And home is about safety and finding the place where you feel most like yourself. And how does that change when you can't trust the planet that, for a long time, people have been able to trust that it will largely maybe be what they, from your birth to your death, that it would largely be the same. And we don't live in that time. We are seeing so much change. So that is one of the questions I ask, is how do you cultivate home when it's eroding? And then, as you mentioned, I had a lot of flooding this week and literally saw huge parts of my, the land on which I get to live erode, like literally. And so I've written that in this way, and now it's so literal in my life this week, and so felt in a different way. So it's just interesting seeing those words that I've written come to life in a different way right now. And it makes the question even more urgent for me, is, what is home right now? And then the last thing was just around animals. Like, animals for me, not so much a response to what you said, but I think it's the poetry of writing about nature is that animals are very much about this in the story, especially animals that find home and look for home and go to great lengths to find home. So they travel, birds traveling continents because they want to raise their babies where they want to raise their babies. So I took a lot of inspiration from the beauty and poetry of the animals that I meet in the woods where I live. So whether it's turtles or birds, they're very much a part of the story and have been teachers along the story as well.
And I guess I'm unclear if you've concluded about what is home. Or are you just putting it out there?
Right. I think I've concluded that we are home, like human beings, and that home is, we make home, we cultivate it. We add that meaning to places, and that gravitating towards each other and to our humanity is going to be what helps us care for this home through all of the heartbreaking changes that we're going to see. And I think that goes back to us being beneficial and good, is that we're a part of this home. We can't separate ourselves from it. And that's our life's work right now, is taking care of this home. And I write about, when your mother is sick, or, someone beloved is sick in your life, you don't say, oh, is this going to work out? Should I have hope? I don't know. Like, that's something that we often say, I think, when it comes to environmental decisions, like, oh, should we do this anyways? Is it going to make a difference? Can we, how can we even lower these emissions? Like, what should we try? But if it's someone beloved like our home is, you try anyways, because of all the love that you have and because it matters more than anything. And that's where I landed really in the end of this book is, taking care of this as the work of our lives, because it is home.
And home isn't necessarily your shelter, the physical structure that's part of it, but it's a space, it's a set of relationships, it's whatever you treasure, I guess. And some people treasure physical things more than others, but yeah, I did think a bit about home.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, I'll say on that's like with this flooding that we saw, and saw the road ripped into and a huge amount of land go away, is that our house is okay, like the cabin where we live, which is, we're so fortunate and we're safe, and so we're so fortunate in many regards, but like insurance covers the house, right? Like the walls and the structure. But part of why I'm so heartbroken by it is, to your point, it's what you treasure. And like, I don't treasure the walls. I treasure the tree that was lost, that I sat against for years, and which has so much meaning for me. Or there are parts of it that I treasure more, and why I chose to live there was because of those reasons. And so that part is gone. And so that's what comes up for me when you mention like the house. The home is not the house, it's a place. And I can really see with living in this place that I've just fallen in love with, it like feels like a part of me, and I've only lived there for 6 years, but I love it more than any home I've ever encountered, and it feels like a part of me in a way that I had never known before. And so I cannot imagine with people for whom their home was stolen from them over thousands of years, and whose identity and way of life was intimately tied to that home, how it's like the greatest of tragedies, and in ways that I can't fully understand, of course, but that is, that just, I feel that in new ways all the time, how terrible that stealing of land has been.
And ironically, we when we did the first interview, we went for a sound walk in spaces that have now been transformed by ecological disaster, really, because that level of flooding is not normal. It's part of the accumulation of humidity in the air and part of the climate change consequences that we're facing around the world, flooding, fires, and so on. And so I guess we preserved a little bit of the sounds of that space for eventual regeneration. Are you feeling, you talk a lot about regenerative agriculture. Are you feeling that your home can be regenerated, or at least adapted to these new realities in ways that are, I know it's emotional for you.
Yeah. I think I will feel that way in the future. I do think I will feel that way, and learn in even deeper ways about what that really means, and that it can regenerate or rewild, and that it will never be the same, and that it will be out of human control in a lot of ways, and then that the next thing will happen and it'll change again. So I do think I'll get to that place, and I feel like right now I'm in a grieving place where it just feels so sad, and sort of destabilizing, like just going to bed and your home being one thing, and not just your home, others' homes as well. And then you wake up and it's like changed in massive, irrevocable ways. So I feel destabilized and upset right now, but I imagine I will get there. And maybe that'll be the sequel, is the rebuilding from the ground up, and doing so in a way that works with the new realities.
And continuing to do the advocacy. You were director of Ecology Ottawa for a couple of years, and you've done a lot of advocacy to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change in the region here. But there's only so much we can do. We can't control the waters, and yet we have a relationship. We are mostly water, right? So in a way, those waters that are angry, if you think of it that way, teaching us a lesson about some of the things that have been done to the climate by industrialization and so on. And there's a sadness in there for all of us, and we need to live with that grief. We need to live with that echo grief that is talked about more and more. Something to sit with and to be energized by in terms of how you want to live in the future. And you've done a lot of sharing, which I think is essentially or one of the essential messages of the book, about sharing tools, sharing space, sharing knowledge. And living in a way that is not only cooperative, but literally, being connected to others in ways that are vulnerable, right? Because your house, my house, we're all extremely vulnerable.
Yes, and we're all going to experience these losses in different ways at different times, and we will absolutely need the skill and emotional intelligence to help each other out through it and express it and face it, instead of pretending it's not real. And I think that will become one of the essential skills. And that's the only bright side perhaps, is after this happened at one point, several of us neighbors were standing there and just watching the guardrail bent into pieces, and the road starting to tear away and all of that, and all just standing out there, and couldn't hear each other because the water was so loud, but waving at each other and putting your hand on your heart, and then texting each other, do you have food? Because we couldn't get in or out, so do you have food? And all the neighbors looking out for each other. And one of the neighbors sent a message that was really like, come here if you need. I truly mean it. And it's not someone I see often, but truly come stay here if you need a place to stay. And someday we're going to ask for the same thing in return. That's what, that's our Friday night. We thought we were going to watch a movie, and instead it's, people out, kind of it's very similar to COVID in those early days, right? Where you're feeling so much love for other people, and you're all in that experience together. And so that will be so important, and we won't be able to keep up with all of the rebuilding that's needed, and the floods and the fires, we're not set up to cope with it all. So people looking out for each other and community is something I believe in a lot.
Well, in our previous conversation, we talked about the role of art in the ecological crisis, and we won't revisit that. I'll send people to that episode, but it strikes me that the next season, and you're also a podcaster, you do the Reseed podcast, so we're kind of brothers and sisters in podcasting. Yeah.
That's nice.
My next season is going to be around art in times of crisis. So this is a crisis in your life and your community, and so I'm thinking the stories that you told in your book. Now people haven't read it yet, but in your book and other books will come in handy in times like that. Songs with your children to calm them down. There's all kinds of ways that art help in difficult periods. Does anything come to mind when I talk about that?
It does. It makes me, one thing is, it makes me want to talk with other people in my area and come together and express what people are feeling, because we are in no way alone. And I picture the same for, people experiencing wildfires right now. Like, how do you find each other and share that and remember what was lost, like almost in a funeral sort of way? Like, what are the rituals that we'll need to mark lost spaces that mean a lot to us? So coming together is one. And the other is, how do I, with my kids, create something out of this that helps us remember it? So I'm gonna think on that, because it is a loss. It is grief. Lots of people are dealing with that. And how do you, put a ritual to that so that you can actually put that somewhere? Because I feel that in myself right now, wanting to talk about it. Someone stops by to take a look at it so they can, file something for the municipality. And I want to tell them like what the tree meant to me, and that's not what they're there for, but I do feel that need to express it.
Well, we'll revisit this topic on our third conversation.
There you go.
Sometime in the future.
Maybe I'll be brighter about it. I'll be like, we're regenerating, and it's, I've learned so much through it, and maybe I'll be a cheerier guest.
Well, it's neither cheery or not cheery, because it's real. It's like the book itself. There are some really sad things in there, and there's some really joyful things, and it's the irony of life that we have all these simultaneous experiences and beauty and eventual death and passing. There's things that I just, that's why I think the book is going to set a tone of openness and vulnerability, and also your background as an artist, as a dancer, as somebody who's embodied an art practice for many years. And how did that work out? You talked about abandoning your dance because you broke your arm, but the dancer continues to dance.
It's true.
Doesn't she?
She does. She does. I couldn't, I thought I'd, stopped and stepped away, but the dancer is strong. So.
Well, we could go on. We could go on, but let's continue with a kind of conventional ending of how can you get the book? Yes.
So my website, AliceireneWhittaker.ca, has links to get it. It should be at people's local bookstores, which is a great place to get it. Any of the big bookstores as well, like Indigo Chapters, it's there. And then through my publisher, Freehand, as well, they have it. But all the links to that are in my on my website, so people can pick it up.
Well, my son has just arrived, who was the first guest of this season. Hi, Riel. Just plugging.
Nice to meet you.
I'm plugging his show because he was the first guest
nice.
on the season this year. And the book, and what happens at book launches? Like, will you speak and talk about it?
Exactly. So I'll do a short reading from the book at the launch events, and there'll be copies of the books there, and mingling and community and people talking, getting a chance to ask questions about it. And I'm having one in Chelsea, one in Wakefield, and one in Ottawa. But I'll have others that I'm adding soon in other parts of the country, including Ontario and hopefully out west in Alberta and British Columbia. So more will be added as I go.
In my experience with book launches is that they're a celebration of achievement. The book exists, and of course there's a team working with you. Your editors and your publisher, all these people are celebrating as well, this arrival. It's a type of birth.
Yeah.
And then people will, like I did, talk about it. And I hope that will be enriching for you and for all of us, just to poke at it a little bit, and say, well, what about this topic? Or hey, there's an additional organization, because you can't know it all, right? But what you did that was really helpful for me is quote a lot of books I have either read or intended to read, and then connected them through quoting and sense making. So it saved me a lot of time.
Oh, good.
But I think there's real value in that for those, like I'm retired and I have time to read a lot of things, and you're a fast reader, I think, because you read a lot in a busy life. But it's nice to be a connector of knowledge and of sensations and of whatever it is. That's what artists do, right? So I think your book was successful on that front.
Oh, thank you. I think that is a reflection of how my brain works, is very connective. And over the years that I was working on it, it's like one book would lead me to another, would lead me to another topic. And now I'm in someone's barn asking them questions about soil. And so I sort of followed the thread in this very meandering way. And so it won't be comprehensive. Like if someone really wanted to learn about, like I say, like renewable energy and the intricacies of it, it's not that. It's more, how does a human being, to your point, like make sense of all of this and decide, how am I going to be with all of this information and all of these models of different ways to be right now?
And why don't you plug your podcast, because it's on my top 10 list on my A Calm Presence Substack.
Wow, I'm flattered. So Reseed is about repairing our relationships with nature and each other. And it actually it was born out of the book, because I was working on the book and had these amazing conversations and interviews, and I'd often record them for myself. And it was like, why are these not, I need to be sharing these, and in a book is such a long process. It takes place over years, and a podcast was much more immediate, and I could touch and feel it and share it with people. And it was helpful for me too, just learning what I really believe in and think, and my voice through the podcast. So they're very interconnected in a lot of ways. And similarly on Reseed, I speak with a whole host of people who are repairing their relationship with nature or living in regenerative ways that are born out of their geography and their interests and their privilege and what they like to do. So one person might be an artist, another a farmer, another an activist, all different people. And I've learned a lot from them. I'm really grateful for them. So we have long in-depth conversations that go from where their love of nature came from, if anywhere, if they had an experience as a child, all the way through to what they're working on, and all the way through to how their ancestors impacted their environmental journey.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.